And as you know from the other lesson, I just said, alright, things are in equilibrium right now. That's just possible. Hello there, my name is Tim Story, and I'm the owner of Shield Services LLC. I'm going to be your instructor presenting a class to you through Shield Academy titled Visual Observer. Visual observers assist remote pilots in command of small unmanned aircraft systems with the various duties that they need to perform in order to remain in compliance with the FARs. FAR stands for Federal Aviation Regulations. So the purpose of this class is to train you to be able to assist a remote pilot in command so that they can remain in compliance with the FARs. Sometimes a pilot just can't handle a flight all by themselves and they need an extra pair of eyes. And that additional pair of eyes also helps maintain safety at a perimeter that's further than the remote pilot in command can control. So let's begin. The subject areas that you're going to cover today for visual observer training are not difficult, but you have to pay attention. The information that comes at you is very important to learn. You're going to learn about Title 14 of the Code of Federal Aviation Regulations. There is an area of the FARs that is specifically for visual observers. So we're going to have a definition and explanation of the responsibilities of the visual observers. You're going to learn the 4 rules of drone ops, also known as the 4 RDOs. You're going to learn about positioning. You're going to learn about mitigating threat actors to understand the security aspect of being a visual observer. And again, we'll cover your duties. We'll learn about spatial orientation. We're going to cover flying at night. We're going to learn about the National Airspace System. And you're going to learn basic phraseology. So lesson 1 was easy, and lesson 2 just gets a little more difficult. Now we're going to cover the Federal Aviation Regulations, specifically geared towards visual observers. 14 CFR 107 is where small unmanned aircraft systems regulations are found. They can be found in the Code of Federal Regulations. There's an eCFR website, which you see right here. I took just partial screenshots of it and put it onto a slide. The section for visual observers is 107.33. Remote pilots in command had to pass this on their remote pilot exam in order to become a commercial remote pilot. And when they use visual observers, they have to make sure that the visual observer understands the FARs that they are responsible for. So, beginning here, if a visual observer is used during the aircraft operation, all of the following requirements must be met. Letter A. The remote pilot in command, the person manipulating the flight controls of the small unmanned aircraft system, and the visual observer must maintain effective communication with each other at all times. So what this is basically saying is the remote pilot in command may have somebody operating the controls other than themselves. They're allowed to teach people, and that person is not the remote pilot in command, but the remote pilot in command can be standing right next to them and can grab the controls for them or use a buddy type of control system that's linked so that they can take over from their individual controller. So A means that the person who's manipulating the controls, which could or could not be the remote pilot in command, and the remote pilot in command, and the small unmanned aircraft system visual observer have to be able to communicate with each other, and that is usually done through either a telephone on a, say, Nextel type of setup, or through two-way radios. Visual signals by hands can be done also. You can shout and scream at each other. but I think the best way to do this is just with two-way radios on a network where everybody has their own. Whatever two-way communication choice is selected, it has to take in consideration that if there's a waiver for a beyond visual line of sight, which is known as a BVLOS, where the drone remote piloting command may not be able to see the drone, and they were able to get a waiver because they're using visual observers, and the visual observer may need to call out something very quick like pause or stop or do an emergency landing. This is why you have to be very careful in your selection of how you choose to communicate. The device that you choose has to be easy to use, and it has to be quick. Nextels are pretty quick, but two-way radios, I think, allow the person who needs to communicate to be able to key the mic and be the one that's being heard. Okay, moving on to subparagraph B. The remote piloting command must ensure that the visual observer is able to see the unmanned aircraft in the manner specified in 107.31. So sometimes we go down a rabbit hole of linked FARs when you're studying FARs. So I put 107.31 up there for you. It's known as the visual line of sight for aircraft operation. And it states, A, with vision that is unaided by any device other than corrective lenses, the remote piloting command, the visual observer, if one is used, and the person manipulating the flight controls of the small unmanned aircraft system must be able to see the unmanned aircraft throughout the entire flight in order to 1. Know the unmanned aircraft's location. 2. Determine the unmanned aircraft's attitude, altitude, and direction of flight. 3. Observe the airspace for other aircraft or hazards. And 4. Determine that the unmanned aircraft does not endanger the life or property of another. B is, throughout the entire flight of the small unmanned aircraft, the ability described in paragraph A, which is the one above I just read, of this subsection may be exercised by either the remote piloting command and the person manipulating the flight controls of the small unmanned aircraft system, or a visual observer. So what this means, 107.31, is it's a strict but common sense approach to how the team is going to work together with the drone. So somebody at all times has to have visual sight of the small unmanned aircraft system, the drone, with their unaided eyes. Now, vision glasses is one thing. You're allowed to have vision glasses. We're talking about binoculars, sight scopes. If you're flying at night, we're talking about thermal imagers. You can't use any of that stuff to comply here. So somebody has to be able to do this with their eyesight. Now, the remote piloting command pretty much always has to be able to see it. The visual observer, can pull out a pair of binoculars to look for it when it's not quite at their location yet to help them. But I think it's hard to spot like that. You want to really be able to see this with your bare eyes. It's a lot easier to find a drone in the air that's moving. It would be hard to pick up one with a set of binoculars if you're just scanning the sky. And then it would be hard to maintain focus on it. So it's a common sense approach. The remote piloting command has to always, by regulation, be able to see it, but there are times when they won't. And if they get a waiver, the waiver, as long as the remote piloting command can see it on the control console, the screen that's on the remote control, and they have a waiver to do so, can actually get permission to fly without being able to see it anymore with their bare eye. And then that's when the visual observer comes into play, where they have to be the one that can see it. So this type of handoff needs to be pre-planned, and then it needs to be constantly communicated. And the remote piloting command has to know that the visual observer maintains the sight if they're flying under a waiver where the pilot does no longer have to see it. So pretty common sense approach. All right, going back to 107.33, going to C. The remote piloting command, the person manipulating the flight controls of the small unmanned aircraft system and the visual observer must coordinate to do the following. 1. Scan the airspace where the small unmanned aircraft is operating for any potential collision hazard. And 2. Maintain awareness of the position of the small unmanned aircraft through direct visual observation. So we basically just discussed that, and later on in this training, you're going to learn how to scan the sky appropriately. So, moving on. What does Part 107 say about visual observers? There are two provisions we need to read up on to better define the FAA's requirements when it comes to visual observers. The need for a visual observer is outlined in Section 107.31 titled Visual Line of Sight Aircraft Operation. 107.31 requires the remote pilot command and the person manipulating the flight control of the small unmanned aircraft system must be able to see the unmanned aircraft throughout the entire flight. This establishes a need for visual line of sight for drone pilots, which allows them to see the drone's location, attitude, and direction of flight while simultaneously scanning the skies for potential hazards. However, 107.31 also allows for visual line of sight to be established by a person other than the remote piloting command, the visual observer. In a way, the visual observer can act as the proxy of the RPIC so that at least one person in the flight crew maintains visual line of sight with the drone at all times. 107.33 goes into further detail about the responsibilities of a visual observer. There's nothing unusual about the responsibilities as they are merely an extension of the visual line of sight duties of the RPIC. In a nutshell, the VO must be able to see the drone and scan its surroundings for potential collision hazards. The rule also outlines how the visual observer and the RPIC must be able to readily communicate with each other. If one of them or both of them loses sight, that needs to be communicated because the RPIC has some specific things he needs to do or she needs to do under the FARs in order to give time to reacquire that aircraft visually, or else they have to kind of move on to emergency procedures, which may involve trying to return to home or landing the aircraft. All right, so we move on to lesson 3, the visual observer role and duty. So we basically just began to cover that in lesson 2 with the FARs. The FARs basically outline what the visual observer's roles and duties are. So that's the knowledge part. Now we're going to kind of get to the skill part. Everything in aviation has both a knowledge and a skill aspect. So the skill part begins knowing the 4 rules of drone ops. Rule 1, the PIC is the captain. The designated pilot in command has the sole authority of the safe and effective operation of the drone mission. Decisions to fly and not fly and positioning actions of the visual observers is under the control of the PIC at all times. Rule 2, VO controls non-participants. A visual observer has the initial control of all non-participants in their area of operation to maintain safe and legal operations of the drone in the vicinity of non-participants and must relay the situation and actions to the PIC for further action. We're going to talk about why the PIC needs to know everything that's going on. They need to have situational awareness. Rule 3, maintain comms and visual line of sight, VLOS. VOs and PIC maintain constant communication, and VOs must maintain visual line of sight with the drone at all times or notify the PIC that VLOS is lost. And then rule 4, no operations over people, known as OOP, without FAA waivers. The drone must not fly over non-participants without special FAA waivers having been granted, or if the drone falls under an approved category, 1, 2, 3, or 4, that allow it to then fly over people. But it's not easy for drones to meet those categories. There's a lot of drone preparation that needs to be done. Sometimes additional equipment needs to be purchased, and it's an undertaking. So most times when you fly, the drone that you're operating with is probably not going to be a category drone. However, it could be. So you have to know how to apply the FAR here. Also, concurrently, there is new legislation that is being undertaken where the FAA is working on Part 108, which will allow certain types of drones to function beyond visual line of sight from whoever is controlling them. It's a lot of info. There's not a lot known about it yet. There are some people looking into it. You can find some information about it online. You can call the FAA. When it affects, for the purposes of this training, I will make adjustments to the training. But for right now, 107 and 108 are going to be 2 separate areas. However, we don't know how it's going to affect visual observers. I don't see them having a section, a different section for them for the law. So that's probably going to be a combined type of training, and it'll probably stay dependent upon whether you operate in 107 or 108. We're not sure yet. Just know that that's out there, and it's a change that you're going to have to make yourself aware of in the future. All right, so moving on, the remote piloted command is going to control where the VOs will be assigned. So in this picture slide, we have a target area. We have a building, and we have VOs, 4 of them, established in specific areas around the building with the piloting command there at the what would be, I guess, the south edge of the building, the south corner, or not corner, south middle there. And as the PIC flies it, the VOs are responsible for the remote aircraft as it comes around the target area. So there's a lot of trees there. The pilot might not be able to see the drone, especially where VO3 and VO4 are stationed. So as it comes into their area of responsibility, if the PIC has a waiver and doesn't have to see it, he or she relies on the visual observers. If the pilot does have to see it, then the pilot may need to move back a little bit to change the angle to get some of the obstructions out of the way, out of the line of sight, so that they can maintain a visual contact with the remote aircraft. Now, the good thing here is everybody's mobile, hopefully, unless they're like hanging over a cliff or they're on the edge of something and they can't move. But most people can move. Most visual observers and most remote pilots in command can move. So the arrows demonstrate how, say you had 2 visual observers, say there was only VO2 and VO4. Well, they can move to cover those areas and can move with the drone. The remote pilot in command could slow the drone down so that it's at a walking speed. And visual observers can be under the drone. Now, you don't want to have operations over people with non-participants, but visual observers are considered participants, and the drone can very well be over top of them. They're aware of what it's doing and where it is and why it's there. They can be right under it, and by doing that, they can tell non-participants in the area, don't stand near me, there's a drone overhead. So they have the ability to do that. The FAA wants them to have the responsibility to do that. So they have a little bit of authority. You're not police officers. You can't, charge people with not listening if they choose to not walk under. The pilot may not be able to stop the drone. You're trying to keep them away. And if they don't listen and they walk underneath, that's not really the responsibility of the pilot. Everything was done to follow the FARs. However, you have to voice that on the radio that that's occurring. So you're not a traffic officer. You can't stop traffic. You can't stand in the middle of the road to keep cars from coming down the road while the drone's flying overhead. There's actually a break in the FARs for the pilot that allows them to fly over moving vehicles on a road if the drone is traveling to a specific location to get a job done and then to return. The only thing it can't do is sit there and hover over them or keep going back and forth over those cars. Then that allowance is no longer in effect for them. It's like a one-time permission that if you're heading to a specific mission site, a job, you can pass over those vehicles. So the visual observer wouldn't have to worry about that anyway. So just to reiterate this, the FAA is the ultimate authority for small unmanned aircraft operations, all aircraft. The FAA is who's in charge. They're the big dog. They require their pilots that are certificated by them to understand the FARs, and the part about flying over people and flying over moving vehicles is established in federal law. So therefore, pilots have a responsibility, and they also then gain some authority over this to maintain the FARs. But the authority is more of them doing what they can to comply. So that's why they may need visual observers. And by having visual observers who are trained and understand the FARs, those visual observers then, by proxy, have that authority granted by the FAA that they are doing what they can to promote safety and to make sure that both participants and non-participants remain free of injury and risk of serious bodily injury or death. So you're not police officers, but you have the ability to talk to people about this and to become kind of like a traffic director. You're there to advise. You're there to advise these people that this is going on and they have to remain clear. If they're unable to comply, the pilot has to do the best that they can to avoid that area. They may have to temporarily suspend what they're doing, to pause it, to allow that trouble to pass through so that they can continue. And that's why you're there. So you have to understand what it is exactly you're there for and what your role is. So just reiterating your duty: notify the mission team of suspicious, dangerous, or hazardous activity and direct the drone response to or away from the location. So depending upon what your mission is, are you security? Are you aerial photography? Are you doing solar surveys? Are you doing an event for a college or a camp and you're helping out? Drone as a first responder, whatever it is. You have to see things, you have to have situational awareness, and you have to transmit that to the remote pilot who may not have that same vantage point. You're going to pass off your VLOS with the next VO and accept the VLOS from the previous VO. Visual line of sight is with normal eyesight only and no enhanced devices. Binoculars, cell phone zoomed in. You can use strobe lights even during the day, can help. That counts. That is you seeing the drone. Seeing the flashing light is considered seeing it with your normal unaided eyesight. You're going to assist the PIC with avoidance of operations over people unless an FAA waiver has been granted. If a waiver has been granted, then assist the PIC with safe operations over all non-participants. VOs are automatically exempt from operation overhead restrictions and will utilize body position to keep non-participants from being underneath the drone and to move outside a perimeter of reasonable safe distance. So you can position your body and use your voice to keep people heading in the right direction. Assist the PIC with obstacle avoidance. This includes physical structures and other drones and aircraft. Some operations will be near other aircraft, and monitoring will be a critical function. There's trees, light poles, power lines, almost everywhere you go. You may be down the shore. You may have banner towers. You may have low-flying helicopters and other type of aircraft. There may be kites in the area. Notify the PIC of any flight irregularities, unusual drone noise, flight wobbling, anything that becomes apparent is not normal around the drone. It's like something's getting attached to it. Leaves, insects, birds. They get attacked by hawks a lot. There could be debris. There could be something flying around like dirt from somebody using an air blower, and the drone may be low enough to be going through that. That could be a problem for it. And then, last but not least, assist with the flight prep. You could use a drone on deck policy where you're getting one ready, turned off for the remote piloted command because they're unable to operate two drones at the same time without a waiver. And a drone is considered an operation when it's powered on. And you'll have various other tasks as needed by the remote piloted command, and they should be briefed to you before the job begins, but they could also pop up as a need arises during the mission. Moving on to lesson 4, spatial orientation. The use of a VO itself is an increase in spatial orientation. The main reason to use a VO is for greater situational awareness during a flight. While the pilot needs to look back and forth from a screen to the sky and then back to his or her hands, the VO can be there maintaining a line of sight with the drone at all times, ensuring that even in those micro moments where the pilot has to look away, the drone is still flying safely. It's important to emphasize that the role of a VO is not simple. Just having an untrained observer standing nearby watching your drone in flight doesn't cut it. If someone is performing the role of a VO, it's important that he or she be properly trained. This class will properly train somebody. You can use this class in any capacity that you need, and you can add things to it specific to your operation or your organization. And just imagine the difference between someone friendly shouting, "Look out!" A thing is flying somewhere nearby, and someone calmly telling you, "Bird, 12 o'clock high, moving slowly away," so that the pilot knows there's something in the area, but it seems to be moving away. Spatial orientation involves you to know how to scan the sky. It also needs you to have an understanding of where you're located in reference to your job site, and have a knowledge of a compass rose and the hands on a clock for positioning are all skills that need to be developed. So you can read this slide, how to scan the sky. It's important to have a procedure in place. So you're simply not just looking around. You want to monitor the sky. And the best place to start is to just simply start at the 12 o'clock position high in the sky. So find the drone and go right above it. Drones will fly up to 400 feet. They could go higher based on if you're at a job site where you're going over a tower or a building. There's special permissions granted by the FAA for pilots to do that without a waiver. However, the pilot could also have a waiver to go higher. So that'll be covered in the briefing, how high that drone can go. So you want to get an idea of what that altitude will look like. Maybe that's something that the pilot can go to show you what the maximum altitude is so you know. But you want to begin your scan at 12 o'clock high in the sky. You scan from left to right, from 9 o'clock to the 3 o'clock positions on the clock, making sure to cover the same points that the airspace that the PIC is currently flying in. Then starting at the 3 o'clock position, look down and scan back to the left 9 o'clock position. And then if necessary, look further downward and scan back to the 3 o'clock position. So you're going from left to right. You can see the picture on the right-hand side shows a start, and then it moves to the right, and then down, and then back to the left, and then down, and then back to the right, and then you start over again. Of course, the VO also needs to use common sense and all of his or her senses. If a noise alerts the VO to a potential hazard on the ground or in the air nearby, the cause of the noise should be identified, and possible safety issues should be examined at that time. So what this means is you may look away from where you were used to having the drone located, and before you could communicate a problem to the pilot, the drone may have moved. So when you look back, you may not be able to see it temporarily. So you would have to call both things out, that there's a problem in the area and that you momentarily lost sight and you're trying to acquire it again. The pilot can then pause the drone until you can find it again. Maybe flash the lights, maybe rotate it around so that the different lights on the drone can be seen, because it has colored beacons on it also, usually red and green. But if you look at this picture, there's other things here. You can see how not only do you scan up and down that way, but you scan from near to far that way. So you're actually scanning a three-dimensional box around you. And the three areas that you would be at are far beyond the drone, medium around where the drone is, and nearer between you and the drone. When you're in a building, everybody has to have the same orientation to the particular building or job site that you're working on. So if your target area is, say, just that yellow box, the front side where the pilot is usually where the address is. It may not be the same, but the address should always be the alpha side. The pilot could be standing even in the back on the Charlie side or on the sides, but the main address is always alpha. Then you go clockwise, the next side is Bravo, the back side is Charlie, and then the final side is Delta. Some buildings have multiple shapes to them, so if you want to add an Echo or a Foxtrot, work that out in your briefing, or incorporate those angled sides into the one known side on the floor and just keep it to 4 quadrants. Ironically, that type of building labeling is known under NIMS, which is the National Information Management or Incident Management System. So it's very much known by first responders. Some pilots also know that, especially when they're working with drones, as drone is first responder. So if you go into the remote pilot study guide used by the pilots when they were taking their test, it's also a good idea for visual observers to get a hold of it, because there's good information in there for you to learn, and a remote pilot can point it out to you. And one of those sections is found right here in figure 9.2, vision in flight. And the more a pilot understands about the eyes and how they function, as well as a visual observer, the easier it is to use vision effectively and compensate for potential problems. So here again, it talks about your scanning techniques. You want to spend no more than 2 to 3 seconds in a 10-degree field of view. So you break your field of view up into 10-degree segments across the area that you're scanning. So it's not just a constant left to right. It's you move 10 degrees, temporarily pause 2 to 3 seconds, and then continue to move. So it's left to right, down, right to left, down, left to right, broken up into 10-degree segments the whole time, with 2 to 3 seconds spent in each segment. And that's the best way to maximize you being able to see what's going on in that area. Again, common sense. If there's a distraction, a noise, something happens, you can divert your attention away. And if it's that serious, you're triaging it to determine how it's going to affect the drone flight, and you let the pilot in command and other visual observers know about it. And it's hard to classify that as any one thing because there's so many numerous things that could happen out there. So also in the pilot study guide in chapter 10, aeronautical decision making and judgment relates into things you need to know. This is a good section for you to look at. It talks about aeronautical decision making. This was actually a test question for the pilot, and it's something that needs to be known by the entire team. Decision making in a unique environment, aviation, is labeled as ADM. This is a systematic approach to the mental process used by pilots and VOs to consistently determine the best course of action in response to a given set of circumstances. It is what a pilot intends to do based on the latest information he or she has. The importance of learning and understanding effective ADM skills cannot be overemphasized. While progress is continually being made in the advancement of pilot training methods, aircraft equipment and systems, and services for pilots, accidents still occur. Despite all the changes in technology to improve flight safety, one factor remains the same, the human factor, which leads to errors. It's estimated that approximately 80% of all aviation accidents are related to human factors, and the vast majority of these accidents occurred during landing and takeoff. So about a little more than half. ADM is a systematic approach to risk assessment and stress management. To understand ADM is to also understand how personal attitudes can influence decision making and how those attitudes can be modified to enhance safety in the operation of a small unmanned aircraft. It is important to understand the factors that cause humans to make decisions and how the decision making process not only works, but can be improved. So ADM, the pilot is in control. The FAA is the ultimate authority. The pilot is flying safely under the FARs. The VO is that extra pair of eyes and hands and has to become an extension of the RPIC. So you have to be a team member, you have to be a team player, and you have to understand your role. And if you're fatigued or tired or can't do something, you can voice that to the pilot, and another way will be found to do it. That's all part of ADM. The FAA is very risk averse, and the ADM process helps the pilot meet that risk mitigation. And the goal of the risk management is to proactively identify safety-related hazards and mitigate the associated risks. RM is an important component of ADM. When a pilot follows good decision-making practices and a VO assists them, the inherent risk in a flight is reduced or even eliminated. The ability to make good decisions is based upon direct or indirect experience and education. The formal risk management decision-making process involves 6 steps. You can see them right there. I'm not going to go over them right now. You can pause this and look at it if you want to. Consider the automotive seatbelt use. In just 2 decades, seatbelt use has become the norm, placing those who do not wear the seatbelts outside the norm. But this group may learn to wear a seatbelt by either direct or indirect experience. For example, a driver learns that through direct experience about the value of wearing a seatbelt where he or she is involved in a car accident that leads to personal injury. The indirect learning experience occurs when the loved one is injured during a car accident because he or she failed to wear a seatbelt. As you work through the ADM cycle, it's important to remember the 4 fundamental principles of risk management. This is basically in the FAA's main page when you learn about them and about their adverse risk goals. Accept no unnecessary risk. Flying is not possible without risk, but unnecessary risk comes without a corresponding return. Make risk decisions at the appropriate level. Risk decisions should be made by the person who can develop and implement risk controls, and that's going to end up being the remote pilot in command mostly. Accept risk when benefits outweigh dangers, meaning the pilot can deviate from any FAR if he needs to in the efficiency of safety to ensure the safe flight or safety of people free from injury. So even though an FAR requires you to do something, the pilot in command can veer from that temporarily for the time needed to make sure that the safety is managed and that the risk is reduced, and then return back to that FAR. And that pilot also has some tools at their disposal where they can report that it happened to prevent them from ever having to answer for it having happened. You may have heard the term NASA reporting form. That's a good get out of jail free card for a pilot. And I would imagine a VO could also fill one of those out. All right, moving on. First, I just want to add, if you're familiar with the term OODA loop, observe, orient, decide, and act, and how that applies to, very much applies to aviation because it was invented by an Air Force colonel after the Korean War. OODA loop is something you can look up. It's a faster decision-making process. It can be weaponized in order for you to win against an opponent. Has a lot of application to ADM. It's a faster way of doing ADM. I'm not going to train it here in this course, but it's something I recommend you look up. So it's called OODA loop, OODA loop. All right, moving into flying at night. Drones have strobes, which makes you able to see them for quite a long distance. Under the FAR's, drones that are allowed to fly at night for commercial purposes have to have strobe lights visible for 3 miles. Most of them can be seen for far more than that. But that tells you that you could fly a lot farther under your visual line of sight. If you can see the strobe, you're seeing the drone. So we're going to learn about the 3 visual illusions that VOs can be affected by: autokinesis, reversible perspective illusion, and flicker vertigo. As you do your VO rolls, you'll find out it's a lot harder to stare straight up at a drone. It's a strain on your neck, and it's easier to look at it from shallow angles. So these 3 visual illusions are enhanced more by you looking straight up and a little bit easier to cope with when you look at it at shallow angles. So autokinesis can make stationary lights look like they're moving, which can confuse drone pilots. You may have seen this when you look at the stars sometimes. You're looking up and your eye just kind of moves a little bit. It looks like the star becomes a shooting star, and it takes you a while to find it again because your eyes aren't looking in the same place. So you want to watch out for these optical illusions. Staring at far off bright light, like the light from your drone, against a dark background can make it seem like it's moving if it's actually not. This happens because your brain struggles to tell the difference. Stay sharp with adaptive focus. To counter this, switch your focus between different distances. So you go back to your scanning technique. It greatly helps you, especially at night. It helps your eyes adjust better to what's around you. Don't stare too long. Try not to stare at one thing for more than 10 minutes. It keeps your vision clear and helps avoid confusion. So you're not going to stare at the drone for too long. I even think 10 minutes is too long. If you're stargazing, you're up there looking at stars, you're kind of looking around, so you're not really looking at anything for 10 minutes. But when you stare at a building for a while, it makes it harder for you to be able to look at something else. It's almost like you get an image burned into your retina. A reversible perspective illusion is when you can't tell whether what you're looking at is close or far away. If you remember the incident that happened in New Jersey, or started in New Jersey back in the fall of 2024, when they thought there were drones everywhere and UFOs, a lot of that happened because of a illusion known as reversible perspective illusion. If you recall, a lot of news was reporting, aviation experts referring to it as a parallax effect. But what they're referring to is this one, the reversible perspective illusion. VOs need to watch out for this because it could cause issues with your sense of distance and space while you're watching the aircraft flying. Keep moving. Don't stare at one thing too long. Moving around is going to help you here. Use landmarks. Using familiar landmarks helps pilots stay on track and VOs stay on track and know exactly where they are in reference to where that aircraft is flying in the air. And then finally, flicker vertigo, or the strobe light effect. This happens when VOs get disoriented from flickering lights, like those from propellers. Light shining through a spinning propeller can cause this. Remember that most of these small unmanned aircraft systems have 4 or more rotating propellers, and they're going to have strobe lights on them. When you're close to them, you don't really want to stare at those strobe lights. First of all, it's going to mess up your night vision, and then you could also have these problems with the flicker vertigo. So the farther away it gets, the easier it will be to handle that, depending on the size of the propellers. If you suffer from epilepsy or have similar types of conditions, then being a VO at night might not be for you. It may trigger some of your disorder issues. So that's something to consider and to be honest with yourself about. Be careful of the lighting. Avoid the lighting that makes the flickering worse, like low sun angles. Adjust your viewing position to handle it. It helps VOs feel more comfortable and avoids vertigo. Remember, you want to avoid vertigo as much as possible. It can make you very dizzy. Don't stare too long. Try not to stare at the flickering lights too long. Take breaks. Make sure anyone watching knows it could be uncomfortable. Share your experiences with the other VOs. And if you need another team member to step in and take over for you with that responsibility, then go ahead and do that. And try and make sure that that's planned into the operation before you take off and start the mission. All right, we're 41 minutes in and we're almost done. Lesson 5, National Airspace System, the NAS. This is the most complicated part for you. But you need to have this knowledge to assist the remote pilot and commandant to understand why things are the way they are. So why do the pilots need the VOs? Well, depending on where you are in the country, I'm in the Northeast. This area of the National Airspace System is the busiest in the United States. From anywhere from Washington, D.C. up through Boston is going to be very densely packed with a lot of what's known as Class B airspace. You have a lot of major airports here. Washington, Philadelphia, Baltimore, New York, Newark, LaGuardia, and Boston, Massachusetts. And then you have a lot of lower but still busy, lower class but still busy type of airports there. A lot of Class C's and a lot of Class D's, a lot of controlled airports. You also have a lot of military action going on, so there's a lot of need for air traffic control to be involved. So the pilots are going to need you as a VO to help ensure non-participant safety. And they're also going to need you because the increased amount of responsibility in this densely controlled airspace with the amount of air traffic and other issues that are going on. You can see in the map here, you see southern New Jersey with a little bit of Delaware and Pennsylvania in there. That big blue radar symbol looking thing, that's the Class B airspace for Philadelphia International. And you can also see just to the right, the little smaller red one, that's Atlantic City International. So just in the area where I operate mostly, we have some very busy air traffic going on in a very small area. So there's a lot of remote pilot task saturation, which is going to require that extra pair of eyes and extra pair of hands. So when you look at the airspace for the National Airspace System, it's actually very complex, and the pilots need to do a lot of study. Somebody like me who flew general aviation aircraft and went to college in a Part 141 program, it's a lot easier for me. But for a pilot who has no background in aviation, who wants to learn how to fly drones and do it commercially, this is a very complicated system to learn. And they are going to make mistakes, and they are not going to know things. So they need to take their time with it, and sometimes they may need to slow down what they're doing until they can reference enough information to help them get through it. So your knowledge of this can really assist them by just being understanding and doing what you can to help lower their test saturation as needed. So the chart you saw before this one, that was known as a sectional chart. And it has all the detail of all the airway systems and how the airspace is broken up. This chart, provided by the FAA, and this one specifically for drones, shows a looking through airspace instead of down at it. So this would be what it would look like if you were flying across the country. You run into these different types of airspace. So drones mostly operate at 400 feet and below. So that's the lower pink area there. You can actually see there's a diagram of drones operating in there. And you can see the dotted line, which shows the maximum altitude that drones will usually operate at. And you can see, if you look at the left, the blue tower, which is how towers are shown on sectional charts, how the drone's able to go up and over it and even into higher airspace, which was Class E. That different color is a new set of airspace. So most of the United States is covered with a layer of Class G airspace that's very low to the ground, and then has another layer of Class E airspace sitting on top of it. And then all the controlled airspaces sit inside in unique locations all across the country. So they cut into that Class G airspace and that Class E airspace. So just to reiterate this, the pink area is uncontrolled Class G airspace, where it's a lot easier for a pilot to fly with a lot less concern for Federal Aviation Regulations other than weather and operating distances and safety requirements. But once you start looking at these other airspaces, there starts to become more complex Federal Aviation Regulations involved, and the test saturation can really build up. Not only that, they're busy looking for the more probability of aircraft in the area as they get closer to these airports. So just so you know, drones aren't the only things operating at 400 feet AGL, above ground level. There's also landing and taking off aircraft at every airport in the United States. And for drones that are flying over buildings legally as part of their operations, they go into Class E airspace where you have airways for, say, mostly general aviation aircraft that are transitioning, along their flight routes. But you also have lowered areas down to 700 feet AGL that allow aircraft taking off and departing and landing at controlled airfields to have an ability to fly under what's known as instrument flight rules as they transition up into their airways. So it's very easy for drone pilots to have to navigate around larger general aviation and commercial aircraft. And the closer you are to an airport, the more that risk builds. As a VO, you're not expected to understand the airspace. The pilot is. But you're going to have to listen in your pre-operational briefings as the pilot describes how the particular job you're doing is affected by the airspace and how they need you to help them in certain ways. So again, it's not just aircraft taking off and landing that's a problem. You also have banner towing operations, especially if you're down by the shore. Here's Atlantic City International Airport at the Jersey Shore, right around Atlantic City and Brigantine and Ocean City. You have emergency helicopter flights around the hospitals in the big city and down here at the beach. You have, again, the aircraft takeoff and landings and the traffic patterns. You have special use airspace used by the military mostly. You have parachute operations. You have temporary flight restrictions. You have news media drones and helicopters, which may be operating extremely low. You have mapping drones being used by commercial companies doing their construction sites or their solar surveys. And then you have your law enforcement drones. They could be doing surveillance, watching somebody, or they could be responding to a lost child, doing a drone as a first responder or a search and rescue mission. And you may not be aware of any of this stuff until you come in close contact with it. So the pilot needs to have a good understanding, and they're trained to do so. And as they get more experience, they get better at it. But the visual observer slowly learns this as they go, just by being saturated in it with the pilot. And if you want to become a pilot someday, a VO is a good place to start because you get this base foundation on how the National Airspace System works. So just know it's complicated and that the pilot's going to ask you to do things, and it's not that they're being mean, it's they have a lot of work to do, and it's very complicated, and they have to follow these rules. All right, so let's move into phraseology, and we'll finish this class up here. Now, this VO training program can be used by anybody. It can be used by a military unit needing to just train their people quickly. It could be used by somebody assisting the police in a search and rescue operation. It could be used by a company. It could be used by a guy, commercial pilot, just doing aerial photography, and he needs somebody to help him. So you can use plain language all the time. And depending on the type of unit you're working in or situation, they may try and go a little bit more in line with the phraseology they need to use for their organization. The military is obviously going to have some, but VO phrases are basically this simple. And you may take into consideration, if you're talking over the radio, you may want a little bit of security from prying ears so that they don't exactly know what's going on, if that's better for your operation. So VO phrases, you have your distance limit for visual line of sight, used when the VO is in danger of losing his or her line of sight with the drone. So you basically come with the radio and say, I'm at my VLOS distance limit, pull it back in a little bit. It's plain language, you just speak it out. Distance is a go or contact is used when the PIC has moved the drone back into a range where the VO can comfortably observe it. So let's just say VO1 is passing it on to VO2. VO1 alerts VO2 it's coming their way, and VO2, when they have sight of it, says contact. Also, if you lose sight of it and the pilot needs to help you get back, you can come over the air and say, contact reestablished. If you cannot locate it, The common aviation word for this is no joy. All right, it's used by the military and civilian pilots. It's to be used when the VO loses sight or cannot locate the drone on the handoff or to the request by a PIC to locate the drone. Bring it down, used when the VO determines there is an imminent danger and the drone needs to be grounded immediately. Climb, usually repeated a couple of times, used when the PIC needs to climb immediately to avoid an imminent collision. A lot of times you're going to climb over things, but you have to be careful. You can't climb into that 400-foot threshold. If you want to pause for a non-participant, you can say that, and then wait until I give the clear to proceed. It'll be used frequently in parking lots, crosswalks, and outdoor events. And then there's some pilot and command phrases. More experienced pilots, they're going to call these out. And when you're not maybe as experienced, it may confuse you a little bit. You can always ask for clarification. Spinning is usually used when you're preparing to launch. You could also just say preparing to launch, but a pilot may say spin is imminent. Launching and spinning to be used when the PIC is actually launching it at that time. So there's preparing to spin and spinning. Descending to land, used when the PIC is descending for a landing. Landing in a new position is used when the PIC is manually flying to a position that is not the original home point position. PIC cannot locate drone, used when the PIC loses visual contact with the drone. PIC may also say PIC no joy. Can you assist? If either the VO or the PIC cannot locate the drone visually for a period longer than approximately 15 seconds, under the FARs, the PIC should initiate the fail-safe return to home function that's on the drone controller and alert all observers that he or she has done so. If the drone is reacquired, they can pause that and return it to flight. The return to home, or RTH, usually means exactly that. You're coming home, you're ending the sortie, either to repower, maintenance it, or the end of the mission, or because you lost sight of it. So pretty simple. You don't need many more phraseology terms, but your unit or organization or boss may add a few in there, and it's a good idea to learn them because using these phrases can quickly transmit the information that's needed without describing a whole sentence, which just, cues up the airwaves and keeps valuable information from coming, especially in an emergency. The better you get at this, the funner it is. And my advice to you is always find a way to look at the drone from a shallower angle unless you need to stand right under it because of somebody in the area. You want to have fun with it, but you want to be comfortable. And one thing I teach at the Sky Shield Academy is to do things the Sky Shield way. Now, pretty soon I'm going to have a class finished that's out there. If you're interested in becoming a 107 pilot, there's a lot of different ways you can study for the test. The way I'm going to do it, I think, is really good. It'll save you time and money, and you'll have a very strong knowledge coming out of there. Whereas some of these other courses can be very complex, they cost a lot of money, and they take a lot of time. I'm pretty much trimming this to exactly what you need to know. And based on my former experience as a general aviation commercial pilot with an instrument rating and a flight instructor certification, you're going to be getting a lot from it. So I recommend that to you. It'll be coming out, if it's not already, when you study this class. It will be shortly because I plan on getting it out before the fall or in the fall of 2025. And one of the things I'll do that some of the other classes don't do is I teach you how to maintain your knowledge even as things change, about how to integrate yourself into the FAA system that has been created for you to integrate you into the National Airspace System and to make you a professional pilot with the ability to strive to gain additional ratings into bigger, larger, more complicated type of manned aircraft even. So I'm creating a basis of knowledge for you to grow from, and I think you would find that it is more than adequate and exactly what you're looking for. So again, however you arrived at this training, however you located it and began it, if you go to my website for SkyShield Services LLC.com, and I'll put it up here in a minute, you can keep yourself updated on the progress of the course. You can see right there, it says Part 107 Remote Pilot Certificate Prep. Eventually that button will access what you need to do to start the course. So good luck to you. If you have any questions, you can contact me through the information on this website, and I'll be more than happy to get back to you as soon as I notice that there's a message waiting for me. I don't check the emails very much on this, but you can call me on the phone. All right, good luck to you again. Thanks for attending this class.